Chronic jealousy often begins with the quiet habit of measuring the self against everyone else, a relentless internal scoreboard that never turns off. In T-state, every conversation becomes a mirror. Every success story of another person feels like a verdict on one's own worth. The jealous mind scans faces, achievements, friendships, bodies, talents, and love stories, then ranks itself at the bottom without mercy. Even moments meant for joy are interrupted by intrusive thoughts, asking who is better, who is more desired, who is winning at life. This comparison is not curiosity. It is self-punishment disguised as awareness. Over time, the person forgets how to experience others without turning them into rivals. Admiration curdles into resentment. Inspiration collapses into despair. The heart grows tired from carrying invisible scales everywhere it goes. What makes this sign so painful is its intimacy. The jealousy lives inside private thoughts, whispering that belonging is scarce, and love must be competed for. Slowly, identity erodes, replaced by borrowed measurements that never fit. The world feels like a crowded room where everyone else has something the jealous soul lacks, and no amount of reassurance seems strong enough to silence that belief. At the core of chronic jealousy often lies a deep fear of being left behind, a trembling expectation that love is temporary and loss is inevitable. This fear does not always announce itself loudly. Instead, it hides in questions, in subtle tests, in the need for constant reassurance. The jealous person may read silence as rejection, distance as betrayal, independence as a threat. Even healthy boundaries can feel like warning signs that the bond is weakening. This fear creates a constant state of emotional alertness, where the heart braces for impact that has not yet come. Relationships become fragile spaces filled with unspoken anxiety. The person may cling tightly, not out of control, but out of terror. The letting go even slightly will invite abandonment. Ironically, this fear can push others away, reinforcing the very wound it tries to prevent. Love begins to feel like something that must be guarded rather than shared. Trust struggles to grow in soil saturated with dread. Over time, the jealous individual may forget what safety feels like, living instead in a cycle of hope and panic, convinced that being loved means always being one step away from being replaced. Chronic jealousy sharpens attention to an exhausting degree, turning the mind into a constant surveillance system. Every glance, every delayed reply, every change in tone becomes evidence to be examined. The jealous person listens between words, searching for hidden meanings that confirm their fears. This hypervigilance is not curiosity. It is survival mode. The nervous system stays activated, scanning for threats that may never materialize. Relaxation feels unsafe, because vigilance feels like protection. Over time, this constant alertness drains emotional energy and distorts perception. Neutral behaviors begin to look suspicious. Kindness toward others feels personal, and coincidences turn into elaborate stories of betrayal. The person may feel justified in their watchfulness, believing that awareness prevents pain. In reality, it prevents peace. Relationships lose their softness and become tense landscapes filled with imagined dangers. The jealous individual rarely feels present, always leaning into the future, bracing for loss. What hurts most is that this vigilance often replaces intimacy. Instead of connecting, the person monitors. Instead of trusting, they investigate. Love becomes something observed rather than experienced, filtered through fear rather than felt through openness. Living with chronic jealousy is profoundly tiring, even when the person does not fully realize why they are so drained. The constant mental loops, the repeated questioning, the endless emotional spikes wear down the body and spirit. Joy requires energy, and jealousy consumes it before joy can arrive. The jealous person may wake already tense, carrying unresolved feelings from the day before. Small triggers spark big reactions, followed by guilt, shame, or self-criticism. This cycle repeats until exhaustion becomes a baseline state. Rest does not feel restorative because the mind refuses to slow down. Even in moments of calm, there is an undercurrent of unease, as if something bad is waiting just out of sight. This exhaustion can lead to irritability, numbness, or withdrawal. The person may blame themselves for being too sensitive or dramatic, not recognizing that they are simply worn out from constant emotional labor. Chronic jealousy asks the heart to run without rest, to guard, compare, fear, and anticipate all at once. Eventually, the soul grows heavy, longing for stillness, but unsure how to reach it. When jealousy becomes chronic, control often masquerades as reassurance. The person may try to manage situations, people, or outcomes in an attempt to soothe inner fear. Questions multiply, plans become rigid, and spontaneity feels dangerous. Knowing where someone is, who they are with, and what they are thinking seems like a way to stay safe. Control provides an illusion of stability in a world that feels unpredictable. Yet this comfort is fragile and short-lived. The more control is exercised, the more anxiety demands. Boundaries feel threatening because they limit access to information and influence. The jealous person may not recognize this behavior as control, instead viewing it as care or concern. Beneath it lies a belief that trust alone is not enough. Over time, relationships can begin to feel confined, as if love must follow strict rules to survive. This dynamic creates tension and resentment on both sides. The controlling behavior does not heal the jealousy. It feeds it. Each attempt to secure safety reinforces the idea that safety is always at risk. True comfort remains out of reach because control cannot replace trust. Chronic jealousy slowly reshapes how a person sees themselves, often in harsh and unforgiving ways. The jealous mind builds an identity around perceived inadequacy, telling stories of not being enough, not being chosen, not being special. Compliments bounce off, while criticism sinks deep. Self-worth becomes conditional, dependent on attention, validation, and comparison. When others succeed or receive love, the jealous person may feel diminished, as if worth were a limited resource being taken away. This distortion makes it difficult to stand firmly in one's own value. The person may overperform, people please, or constantly seek proof that they matter. Even then, satisfaction is brief. Doubt returns quickly, questioning whether the approval is genuine or temporary. Over time, the inner voice grows cruel, echoing fears of replacement. The tragedy of this sign is that it hides the person's real strengths and tenderness. Jealousy convinces them that worth must be earned through competition rather than recognized as inherent. Healing requires unlearning this belief. But as long as jealousy dominates, self-worth remains fragile, easily shaken by the presence or success of others. One subtle sign of chronic jealousy is resentment toward people who have done nothing wrong. The jealous person may feel irritation toward confidence, ease, or happiness in others. Laughter can sound like arrogance. Freedom can feel like neglect, and independence can feel like rejection. This resentment is rarely admitted out loud, because it conflicts with the person's values. Still, it lingers quietly, coloring interactions and thoughts. The world begins to feel unfair, as if others are breaking unspoken rules by being content or secure. This feeling isolates the jealous individual, creating emotional distance where connection could exist. Compassion becomes harder when jealousy frames others as threats rather than fellow humans. Over time, this resentment can turn inward, producing shame for feeling bitter or small. The person may wonder why they cannot simply be happy for others. The answer lies in pain, not malice. Chronic jealousy interprets others' ease as evidence of one's own lack. Until that wound is addressed, innocence in others will continue to sting. Not because it is wrong, but because it highlights an unmet longing within the jealous heart. Chronic jealousy trains the mind to see danger everywhere, even in ordinary moments. A smile, a name mentioned in passing, a change in routine can spiral into elaborate fears. The imagination fills gaps with worst-case scenarios, often faster than reason can intervene. This overinterpretation feels convincing because it is fueled by emotion rather than evidence. The body reacts as if the threat is real, releasing tension, panic, or anger. Attempts to calm down may fail, because the nervous system has already decided there is something to protect against. The jealous person may replay scenes repeatedly, searching for clarity, but finding only more doubt. This habit erodes trust, not just in others, but in one's own perception. Reality becomes slippery, difficult to grasp. Over time, the person may feel misunderstood, believing that others minimize dangers that feel obvious and urgent. This gap in perception can strain relationships deeply. What the jealous individual experiences as vigilance, others experience as accusation. Without awareness, this pattern becomes self-sustaining, reinforcing the belief that the world is full of hidden threats waiting to be uncovered. A painful hallmark of chronic jealousy is the shame that often follows emotional reactions. After questioning, accusing, or withdrawing, The person may feel deep regret. They replay their words, wishing they had stayed calm or silent. This shame does not resolve the jealousy. It compounds it. The person may promise themselves to do better next time, only to repeat the pattern when triggered again. This creates a cycle of reaction and self-condemnation that erodes confidence. The jealous individual may begin to see themselves as flawed or broken, believing they lack emotional control. In reality, their nervous system is responding to perceived threats rooted in past wounds. Still, shame convinces them that they are the problem. This can lead to secrecy, hiding feelings to avoid conflict, which only intensifies inner pressure. When jealousy is pushed down, it often resurfaces stronger. The absence of self-compassion makes healing difficult. Without understanding the origin of their reactions, the person remains trapped between fear and guilt. Recognizing this shame as a sign, rather than a verdict, can open the door to gentler self-awareness and real change. Perhaps the most profound sign of chronic jealousy is the gradual loss of emotional freedom. Life begins to feel smaller, narrowed by fear and comparison. Decisions are influenced by imagined rivals. Joy is filtered through insecurity, and presence is sacrificed to worry. The jealous person may not remember when things felt lighter, when love felt expansive instead of fragile. Emotional spontaneity fades, replaced by caution and calculation. Even moments of happiness can feel precarious, as if they must be protected from being taken away. This loss is subtle but devastating. The person is not only afraid of losing others, they are losing themselves. Their inner world becomes crowded with concerns that leave little room for creativity, curiosity, or peace. Chronic jealousy acts like an invisible cage, convincing the heart that freedom is dangerous. Healing begins when this loss is named and mourned. Beneath the jealousy is often a longing to feel safe, chosen, and enough. Reclaiming emotional freedom means learning to trust life again, not because loss is impossible, but because the self is resilient enough to survive it.